once again. Welcome to the Perceptional, elevating all your senses, expanding your curiosity. So plug in now as we welcome your host, Dr. James Donito.
Welcome back to another episode of The Perceptional. This is episode number 12, I believe, and now we're averaging one a month. We'll do better as this year goes on and we find more opportunities to bring information to this podcast instead of just selfishly sharing it with my patients in my clinic. And I am involved in many other great projects that are going to be changing the world, and we'll be sharing those with you shortly. Today's guest, an amazing author and researcher in nutrition, but specifically weight loss nutrition, total body transformation, changing your body both physically and emotionally. Kat James, now that's spelled with a K, not a C. Those house cats, they just pretend to love you, but they really don't. This cat loves you. She loves life. She loves changing the world, and she loves doing what she does. Now, she is an award-winning author and independent researcher, a leptin pioneer, you might say, who's been called the master of self-transformation by Self magazine. Her unique dietary methods are now recommended by top neurological, fertility, functional medicine, and even dental clinics around the world. She's been featured at esteemed spas and institutions such as the Omega Institute and Canyon Ranch. You can go look them up. You'll see what we're talking about. Television. She's been featured on PBS. I see Fox Television, Today Show, Montel Williams. Remember him? He brought a lot of great stuff to the world over many, many years. Discovery Channel, Gordon Elliott Show, to name a few. Magazines, a lot of those been featuring her. Life Extension Magazine, Marie Claire, Ladies Home Journal. And as far as writing, she has a best-selling book on Amazon, and you will see connections to that as well. Podcasts, more lately, I've been on Dr. Lee Merritt's Alex Zeck show, and she even has her own show on Sirius Radio. So here we are today with Kat James, and she has a great story. Sit back. There's going to be a lot of information here, a lot of information, we'll say, that is emotionally driven, hormonally driven, metabolically driven, common sense driven, and by the time we're done, where we can see how we could eat better quality, better, even more quantities of fat, and lose that toxic fat. So, Kat, why don't you tell us how it all began, and we'll start from there. Tell us about the book. Books
Sure.
was plural, right?
Just one
major book?
But it was
Okay.
different editions of it. And then it was chose for re-release, so it's 40% new. And it was 400 pages to start with, so it felt like a new book for sure.
And what was the name of that book?
And that was called The Truth About Beauty, Transform Your Looks, Your Body, Your Life from the Inside Out. And it had to be a beauty-sounding book because that was my background for which I was known nationally before this biochemical transformation happened. And I really had to find a publisher who would allow me to disguise a really cutting-edge health book as a beauty book.
All right. And ultimately, that book sold to one of the bestseller lists, at least, I heard?
It was Amazon bestseller. It won a Silver Nautilus Award. It sold around 100,000, but by word of mouth with no formal PR. So it's a strong kind of grassroots success with that book.
You've helped people because you were in the makeup, let's say cosmetic or whatever you want to call that type of business, that is the business of looking good. Some celebrities you've also helped with this type of diet on here?
Well, it was interesting because I started to get known even in the fashion industry. Some people would call me Dr. Kat. Of course, I'm not a doctor at all. But they found out what I had done for myself back in 1990 at the tail end of an eating disorder. I shared this story with you, and it was a story of getting to a desperate point where my health was falling apart. I wasn't digesting anymore. I had a binge eating disorder. And it started at puberty, and it started with calorie counting, and literally started with sort of starving myself, kind of fasting, if you will. And it started to be rebound eating. It got bad. In my 20s, I started to have these physical problems, digestion problems, horrible skin rashes. And when I wasn't digesting anymore, I went to a doctor, and they said, your liver enzymes are sky high. You need to go to a liver specialist. So I go, and they're in like 600 and 700 range. And he says, we need to do a biopsy. There's nothing viral. So I said, so what if you find something in the biopsy? Oh, we're going to put you on interferon. What if you don't find something in the biopsy? We're going to put you on interferon. And I'm like, there was no internet yet. I'm living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I walk over to Shakespeare Books and I look up interferon, and I don't like what I see. Usually doesn't work, causes you to have depression. And I really, at that moment, because I was in a serious way with self-destructive behavior at that point, and I could not stop. It was not all in my head. I would soon learn. And so I walked into a health food store and I looked up liver health, and I started to take some supplements, and I didn't really believe in them, but they bought me a little time. So I started taking some liver health supplements, and my liver enzymes started to go down. I tried not to binge. I tried to behave better. Long story short, the milk thistle and the alpha lipoic acid that I took and a couple other things got me out of the woods. But I still had this self-destructive behavior. And then one day in the afternoon, 2 o'clock came, and a normal part of my life was that I always was thinking and obsessing about food pretty much all day long. And I had horrible anxiety, depression. I felt like I had a 40-pound ball and chain on me. And it was amazing to me that one day in the afternoon, I looked at the clock and it was already 2 o'clock. And that hadn't happened in my adult life. And I realized that the whole day I felt like my head was just floating over my body, that I wasn't dragged down or obsessive or anything.
What do you mean you hadn't made it to 2 o'clock? Like you hadn't stayed awake that long or hadn't gone that long without eating again?
I hadn't made it to 2 o'clock without obsessing about food.
Okay.
Or without just having a sense of awareness of tiredness and anxiety, but mainly 2 o'clock without obsessing about food. There are people surely listening who can relate to, kind of having food drive their day. I had many other problems, the rashes, the autoimmune issues with my thyroid, et cetera. But it was a miracle to me that I didn't think about food, and I was pure productivity. No energy ups or downs. And I said, that feeling right there, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to make that last 24/7. Through brutal trial and error. Trial and error that if anything interfered with that feeling, it was out. I'd been a vegetarian for 7 years, and it was amazing that all of my favorite superfoods would bring that feeling back. And I ate, strangely leading up to that feeling.
Well, you weren't vegan, though? You were just vegetarian? You still
Vegetarian.
had some animal?
I still was eating, some cheese and yogurt and stuff like that. And so after almost 2 years, I had an overnight thing. So I kept on, my quinoa was gone, my beloved blueberries were gone, and because they interfered, and everybody's got, a different threshold at which this thing happens, which science discovered 4 years later. But I had an overnight event, and at that point, all of a sudden, my rings were spinning, my watch was loose, and I walked over to my refrigerator, and I shopped a couple days before, and what was in my refrigerator didn't look like food. I'm not sure what I was going to eat. I had a lot of things that I was eating, but it was a little weird, and there wasn't a lot of variety. I just knew that feeling was really good, and this overnight thing happened. And so in 3 years, 10 dress sizes came off of me, and I spontaneously did eat meat. I didn't know I was going to order meat, went out with my boyfriend to the restaurant, and I said, I'm going to have, this hamburger, and without a bun. This is 1990, and I just days went on. I started going into buy clothing, and I would just buy something 2 sizes small. I was really tight on me, but I just knew, and I shrank 10 dress sizes. I never binged again in my life. In fact, I haven't even weighed myself since 1990. I have no idea what I weigh. I just shrank.
But at this point, you still weren't sure what was really going on chemically inside of you. You just knew food changes were making big changes inside of you. And then understanding the body, the science, you started getting that curiosity to see what was the name of these
I'll tell you
things.
how I started to know. And no, I had no idea. And my canker sores that I always had, I had like canker sore medicine in my bathroom cabinet, all of my rashes, my dizziness on standing. I had tartar on my teeth. I would just stay there all day. That was gone. It just went away. My thyroid issues, everything. And I was this close to someone from high school at an event, and I had a whole conversation with him. I knew him really well, and I told him who I was, and he was angry. He got angry. I looked not recognizable whatsoever. And so as time goes on, my family, they were used to me having this binge eating problem, this food problem, and they're kind of like, well, all right. They started to listen after about the third year because I had been on diets and I had lost large amounts of weight before. This was easy. This one was like, and I was working in the fashion industry as a makeup artist, working for the magazines. And the magazine editor of this one magazine comes up to me. She goes, because they were used to me being, and I was very pear-shaped. I don't know what the minor profanity rules are for this show, but
we get away with a lot here.
Fat Ass was the name in high school. And the same kid would wait until first hour. Everyone was going to their room, and he'd see me, and he'd look around and make sure everyone could hear him. Hey, everybody, it's, and he would say that name. I was called Human Pear, and my sister and my mother, very wide on the bottom, and that's what happened to me at puberty. That's why I panicked, and that's why I started doing, restrictive dieting and stuff like that. So this 10 dress sizes come off, and I was working already as a makeup artist. I was known as a good makeup artist. My dad was an award-winning watercolor painter. I was a very good makeup artist. And all of a sudden...
You just making people look good with makeup, or did you kind of make them get into characters and creatures and stuff like that?
I
You weren't
didn't
into
do
that
that.
level.
I didn't go into special effects. I was in the fashion world, so I just wanted to look good. And so, but the people, the magazines, I worked with Vogue, I worked with Harper's, and they all wanted to know what in the heck I was doing. And they were like whispering because they knew I was out of control around food. We had Dean and DeLuca. We had the most incredible, food, much better than if I was doing special effects. That's craft services. The food that you get on a photo shoot with a magazine is Dean and DeLuca and all of that kind of stuff. And I was being generous as the person with the eating disorder if I even left one of each kind of pastry on the tray. And I couldn't believe when a model would come up and take a corner off a pastry and just prance off like she didn't care. But, I had an issue. So all of a sudden I don't have an issue and I'm shrinking. And the editors are like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This must take incredible self-discipline. And it didn't. And it was almost impossible to explain. And I would say, it's not what I stopped doing, because it wasn't. It was what I stopped doing. It wasn't what I started doing. And all of a sudden, it took no effort. There was no willpower. And I wasn't an addict anymore. And flash forward. So for many years, I'm like, oh my gosh. And I thought, how can I have other people experience what I do? And so they wanted me on camera talking about what color eyeshadow goes where, what lipstick makes the teeth look whiter. And I just finally said, I got to find a way to tell people about what I've done here. I finally found a publisher. I started doing beauty cruises. It was just women at first. And I would do, and I'd say, if you come on my cruise, and I thought I can trick people into eating the foods that I do, although there is the midnight, chocolate buffet. But I could pretty much get them to stick with what I gave them. And then I would do their makeup, et cetera. And sure enough, and then some would drag their husbands to the event. And they would say, one guy was in tears. He goes, my blood sugar is the lowest in 2 years. And they started saying blood pressure is down and all these things, headaches, migraines, seizures started to happen. So I do this for about 7 years, and I just call it total transformation. And the symptoms that everybody has are a sudden drop in appetite, accompanied by a soaring of energy and an evening of energy. So no more ups and downs. Everyone's living pretty much on peaks and valleys. They experience hunger as a blood sugar low. They experience satiety as a vague sense of physical fullness. Most people haven't even experienced the signal that just comes out of nowhere right when you're in the middle, you're halfway through a plate of mouth-watering food, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I can't eat one more bite. And many people, even people who don't think they've ever had a real food issue, will just finish the plate. Well, there's a really powerful signal, and I didn't know the name for it yet. So a coincidence along the way, I shake the hand of Dr. Jeffrey Friedman at Rockefeller University. I'm dating a human genetics researcher who's a colleague of his. And he says to me, my then boyfriend, he goes, well, we're invited to the party of Dr. Jeffrey Friedman. He knows about weight loss, says the boyfriend. And I'm thinking to myself, man, he has no idea, because not only do I not binge anymore and have no weight problems, but it fixed everything else in my body too. So I shake hands with this guy, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you have no idea. And that's fine. And they couldn't make it into the blockbuster drug that they wanted to make it into.
Did this Friedman have a book out at the time that he was promoting?
Afterward, and I can't remember what the name
point,
is. I think it was right after the discovery, but I don't know what the timing of it was. But it just didn't work as a blockbuster drug. I mean, insulin was more of a blockbuster drug. Mm-hmm. But when they would give leptin, and not to be confused with the plant toxin lectin, right? So it's just singular leptin.
Or for you physics people out there, leptons, Leptons. Those are exotic subatomic particles. There are many of those. And we could talk about that at another show when we're getting into some quantum physics and the role that plays in your existence on this planet and how you can be healthy. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I have no idea about that. And so I meet him. And then people became, just like you become insulin insensitive or insulin resistant, they are leptin resistant, but the drug made them more so. So they just couldn't, it's already in the body, leptin. It circulates from the white blood cells. So 7 years later, after I meet Dr. Jeffrey Friedman, I'm on a book signing with my book, The Truth About Beauty, and I have a bunch of women lined up. And I'm telling them, I hear that a hotshot nutritionist, New York Times best-selling nutritionist, is going to be the next book signing after mine, and that's Dr. Ron Rosedale. Turns out to be, he is the foremost clinical expert, and even the number one insulin guy in the 90s. I mean, a mentor to Dr. Joe Mercola and many others. And then he was also the number one leptin guy, clinical leptin guy. And dietary application outside of a lab almost did not exist, pretty much. I mean, it was all guesswork. And they were basically saying in any books, having some outside chef just do some recipes and just saying what they eat. They just didn't have, there's no observational study whatsoever, other than, again, animals in captivity. And so I'm at this book signing, and I start describing to the people there to just try to be transformed and have this total transformation. And I say, you don't have any more portion control need whatsoever. It stops you from eating too much food. You'll have incredible energy, and whatever your weight is, it'll go toward normal, even if you're underweight. And also, you're not going to have any autoimmune issues. You're not going to have any more sleep issues. You're not going to have any migraines or headaches. And just sharing all the things that I just repeatedly observed just by that time, living along for 7 years with people for 5 to 10 days at a time, 6 to 8 times a year. And so I was just sort of really honing, not just what worked for me, but what worked for other people. And so now I'm at the point where I've given about 129. It's just the retreat I just did was my 129th, about 100 online programs. But I wanted to say that expert at that book signing, I walked up to him after kind of shocking him, or at least I thought I shocked him, because I told this group of people, it doesn't work unless you eat a lot of fat. And he went like this. He goes, just like that. And I walked up to him afterward and I said, okay, thinking he would be, as not knowledgeable about nutrition as most doctors. And I said, what did I get wrong? And he goes, you didn't get anything wrong. And he said, you're the only one who has it right. And he started talking about his clinics that were reversing type 2 diabetes in 14 days. And I said, what's taking you so long? And it was just, it was amazing, because I could ask him every question. Why do people not have allergies? Why don't they have any food sensitivities anymore? He said, because leptin is the great immunomodulator. And I said, how come they don't have seizures? How come they don't have addictions? How come all of these brain things, Parkinson's, it's amazing what we saw. And he said, because it's the great neuroprotectant. And I said, how come they don't have sleep problems? How come they're not anxious? And he said, because it balances the autonomic nervous system so that you go back into sympathetic dominance and out of fight or flight, and on and on. Yeah, and also the emotional stuff that I used to blame it on for a long time. I mean, people that do this, they get angry. They get angry because they really, really are convinced they have a death wish for themselves if they binge eat or whatever. They just really think they're an emotional and mental misfit. But there's also, I mean, you tell a heroin addict, you still haven't done enough emotional work. It's burnout dopamine receptors are a pretty big thing. So not everybody, that we're dealing with, everybody can be benefited by this. But this is irreplaceable for people with addictions. It's irreplaceable.
All right. So now let's give you some Chemistry 101 background into this magical hormone called leptin. Now, it's been around since humans have been around, but it barely 30 years ago since they, quote, discovered it. They discovered insulin a lot earlier than that. I don't know how they missed leptin because as far as the size and weight of these things measured chemically and molecularly, leptin's 3 times as big. And once you discover a hormone, you assign a particular role to it. We would say insulin's job is to bring down blood sugar, but we now know it does a few other things. Leptin's job was to control your appetite going into the brain to key areas, sending a message from the accumulated fat cells. If you have no excess fat, if you're at the ideal body fat, is there any leptin in the system? The answer is yes. There's always some coming from the fat cells. We would ideally like to have a ratio, a certain amount of white cells, white cell fat, yellow fat, we're calling it too, and that'll usually be about 80% to 20% of the brown fat. Now, interesting enough, brown fat is the workhorse. It makes the heat, it makes the energy, and the body can't use the fat unless it leaves through the brown fat pathways. When you're young, brown fat's all up in this region here, and it migrates down towards your pelvis and abdomen, lower abdomen, as you get older. There's some theories as to why that migration occurs, but if you ever watch people getting fat transfers or taking fat out of your body to get stem cells, they're going after the brown fat, and that's where they're going to go in your lower belly or around your buttocks areas where it's concentrated in there. Now, once this leptin molecule was discovered, then further research and decades now has found, wow, and as she was mentioning, there's a lot of other things that it can be associated with. So we might say it helps modulate your immunity, it helps other hormones, it's an antioxidant, cleans up things. We learned similar things about the hormone melatonin. Matter of fact, when I was stupid enough to try and ski back in December and whacked my head and gave myself a concussion, I took 50 milligrams a day of melatonin, and within 48 hours, all of my concussion symptoms were gone. So it helped control the brain swelling mechanism in there. So you can use it in all kinds of manners. What the thing is about leptins is that it's intertwined with so many other things, but what we're really going to be talking about here is the fuel in your blood that her diet gives you, and that's basically the ketone. Now, you can look at a ketone as somewhere of a hybrid between fat and sugar, and I almost want to get into a transsexual discussion here about it can go either way, but I'll control myself. But it is a fuel that burns very, very efficiently. And there's 3 ways of getting into these ketone elevations, the ketosis we want. One would be to go into starvation, and that's going to be a short-lived mechanism. 2 would be to eat massive amounts of fat. Now, we use the word lovingly because we love fat here, and everybody does, but we're just going to make sure you get the right kind of fat. Or the 3rd way is to use exogenous ketones, which have only been on the market for a while, and they are losing popularity, and Kat and I were trying to figure out why we've seen the market waning on that interest on there. But I've seen that they do tend to work to get at least a pump prime for people who weren't able to eat a lot of fat. There's some people, let's face it, they got clogged gallbladder mechanisms, they got no bile flow, and it's going to be hard for them to get those fats down in them.
We'll talk about it.
So then we say you got some bile pills that we can take. That would be one way around it. But ultimately, the ketone is really the secret of all of this. And medical doctors tend to fear this little word as well. They give you ketone test strips at the drugstore to make sure that you're not spilling ketones out, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And there are different types of ketones in the body. But we want to have that fuel, and the cells of our body work best when they're under threat or under repair, and they really benefit from that ketosis type of mechanism. When we're trying to get rid of the stored fat, then the ketosis mechanism is going to be one of the better things. Can we live our whole life in mild ketosis, maybe medically defined, measurable? The answer appears to be yes. We have to look at our diet that it does have needs to fluctuate. We expect diet to be different on a growing kid. We expect it to be different on a pregnant woman. We expect it to be different for a high caliber athlete after someone has a trauma or major infection. But in the end, when you start looking at the caloric base of all of this, the foundational ratios are still generally going to be favoring fat and proteins in there. So she's figured out the way to get that fat to be palatable, burn properly, digest it, and get these incredible results that she's seeing. So now, all right, so tell us the difference between a keto diet, all the foods that say keto bars, keto this, versus how you structure your diet plan for people.
Yeah. So it's going to be a little bit different from person to person because everyone has a different threshold at which they would spike their insulin and also spike leptin. And the worse off someone is, the more dramatic their blood sugar spikes growing up, sometimes medical interventions, but also their heredity. If their parents were heavy, if their parents were diabetic, if they were exposed to a lot of horrible processed foods as a young person, they are going to have a lower threshold at which something really spikes their leptin and insulin. You lose leptin sensitivity before you lose insulin sensitivity. Many people who have not been told that they have any problems with insulin, they all have problems with leptin. I mean, every elite athlete, Oscar-winning actress, trainer from The Biggest Loser, I have not had anyone who accompanied their loved one to a program and they were the thin one who had any leptin sensitivity. And that is a mind-blowing, and that wouldn't have been the case in the 50s. It's the case now because of exposure to epigenetic marks like high fructose corn syrup, maybe some fat phobia, cholesterol phobia. So, but there is a big difference when you pursue a keto diet. You're going to almost always get excess protein. Same goes with carnivory, although I believe that the reason a lot of people who didn't feel as good on keto and went carnivory, the reason they feel amazing and all of a sudden their autoimmune stops is I think they're a little bit of the time feeling some leptin sensitivity and in and out of leptin sensitivity. But with keto, excess protein, bear in mind, most people don't know this, turns to sugar. Excess protein turns to sugar. It will actually spike someone out of leptin sensitivity. And there is also that excess protein is going to set off a pathway called mTOR. And mTOR, that mammalian target of rapamycin, I know that they went to the tribes and there was an anti-cancer substance and drugs were made. All I know is that mTOR is also a protein sensor. And that was determined by Dr. Ron Rosedale, again, foremost clinical expert on leptin as well. So when you set off that mTOR pathway, which the biohackers and the elite athletes don't want to do, well, actually, the people that want to get big want to do that because that's how you get big. You get cell replication, and that's not healthy after you're fully grown. That's pro-cancer. So if you want to cheat nature, as Dr. Ron Rosedale would say, cheat nature and remodel your cells so that you are a highly functioning older person after nature has had their way with your reproductive purpose, then you don't want to stimulate the mTOR pathway with as much protein as people get on keto or carnivory. Why do they get so much protein? Because when people finally do keto, they realize, I got to get off sugar. So people that really, really get off, and that's a great thing, get off sugar, they almost never eat enough fat because of the fat phobia built into people. And so there's a big difference in doing this and going all the way to leptin sensitivity. And when you do, and you reach this flip, literally, to where all of a sudden it goes beyond just ketosis. You are way more of an efficient ketone user in your brain, so much so that, according to Dr. Ron Rosedale, and he's, I'm the practical side. As he says, there's no one doing observational research, living along with people, making this state happen. He calls me hardcore. that I make it happen. He has sent people to me. But in his clinical view, he says that you won't even see sometimes ketones on your ketone strip when you're in leptin sensitivity because the brain is using them much more efficiently. You're reaching a different state with your autoimmune things. You have lots of great things that happen when people go into ketosis, but it's all over the map in terms of what people have, and people like the woman I was would have exploited every loophole available and would not have been in any leptin sensitivity whatsoever because you're, having a little too much of this and keto bars and if you're eating in a window, you're binging on 4-egg omelets. I mean, I work with a lot of keto and intermittent fasting people, and they all suddenly go past their barriers, and they're able to sweep past their weight issues and not have the problems they had on keto and intermittent fasting.
All right. I know what some of my patients are going to want to know might be, are we going to end up with more calories going in? Because we're all calorie counters. And since there's so many calories in fat, when you read the piece of paper that goes with the food, would you say that the average person eating really healthy and losing weight is the magic number our government wants is 2,000 calories? Or are they above or below that roughly if you had to look at just the calories they're putting in their mouth?
I have no regard or thoughts on calories for 34 years whatsoever.
Folks, I can't tell you how happy you're going to be when you start eating and don't have to worry about the total calories. Now, one of the reasons is that you're not going to absorb a lot of those. Fats are very difficult to absorb, but they're not going to be wasted. Your bowel is going to do things. It's going to feed the bacteria down in there. But ultimately, the fat has such a recycling capability in the body, too, so that we have to get away from this caloric thing. We can look at caloric balance, though, right? We can see that the type of calories are more fat.
I don't even talk calories. The reason is we're not, the second law of thermodynamics. We're not calories in, calories out. That's a big lie. So what it is how your body reacts. I don't mean you're not promoting that, I'm sure. And so what it is that it's the body's reaction to the kind of calories. Is your body going to store those calories as fat, or is it going to burn through them? Are you a fat burner, really? Or are you not a fat burner? And if you are eating things that signal your body to store fat, you're not going to. There are studies showing up to twice the calorie consumption in the group that lost weight. And so it is, if you are in a fat-burning state, this is just in the science, then you can consume many more calories.
But does that translate into needing to move physically? Does your body want to move and push things around and get work done?
If you're not leptin sensitive and if you're in famine mode, fat storing famine mode, I don't care if you're starving. And many people are starving, and then they do this, like the trainer, season 3 trainer. You might show Cheyenne's picture. She was starving herself, brushing her teeth instead of eating. Okay, comes to me, hears me on a podcast, says, "You got to help me," and she's come on my radio show and shared this whole thing. And she says, "You got to help me." And she had Cushing's, and all of a sudden she's gaining weight, and she cannot lose weight, and she's brushing her teeth, not eating, and trying to work out 3 times a day to save her career, and doing my program she does kind of the prep to get her body ready, and it changes her premenopausal or her menopausal state premature. So she had stopped having a period. She shared all of this on my show. And she gets to the program and starts eating 3 meals a day instead of starving, 3 meals a day, and working out not even once a day, and loses 18 pounds in under a month, easily under a month, maybe 3 weeks. And the weight she couldn't lose for the previous year has nothing to do with calories. And she herself said, "Oh my God, it's not. I love exercise, great for your brain, great for lymph, and great for a lot of things, but it's not a great weight loss tool."
Yeah, we figured when we had our weight loss company, Slim Generation, running years ago, that we could never expect the role of exercise and being physically active to be more than a third of what the total health picture would be, or the caloric burn, if you want to put it that way. What do you think about people who claim to be breatharians and don't need to eat at all and just live on air and water? I'm fascinated by some
I'd
of
like
these
to live
folks.
along with them 24 hours.
So there's the thing where you can eat as many calories as you want, or maybe this body of ours is so amazing it's able to combust fuel efficiently. When
Leptin
you think about
sensitivity
from air.
won't allow you to eat too many calories because what comes with it is a massive drop-off in appetite, even in the rodent studies. Abrupt drop-off in appetite.
And is
But
that appetite for all kind of calories or more against the bad calories, the carbs and stuff? What do you see
all
the
kind
appetite?
of calories.
So all kind of appetite
you can't
goes
even
down.
overeat fat, and fat has no hormonal response. So you're eating with my approach, hormonally neutrally. You're off of the peaks and valleys. There's no ups and downs. But one of the hallmarks of leptin sensitivity is all of a sudden you are not on ups and downs. I mean, your energy is even. There's no dip in the afternoon. There's no thoughts of central nervous system stimulants like coffee or sweets. It's done. You don't want it. You don't even see it in your mind's eye because you're perfectly stable in your energy.
We're going to get a little bit more into the chemistry of the fuel. Now, we always are taught to believe that a cell can switch between carb, sugar-type fuels and ketones. Can they burn the same? Can they burn both fuels at once, do you think? Or is there one fuel or another that a cell needs to have, ketones or sugars?
We definitely can go both ways on that. I do think we were, again, better at that in the 50s and 60s. We've been hurt, epigenetically. And we've got, as you know, the first generation that's not even living as long as their parents. Incredible changes. And the whole obesity thing, the psych drug era, I truly believe simply stemmed out of fat phobia and the introduction of high fructose corn syrup. And there were some other things in there, trans fats and glyphosates and things like that. But the body primarily uses one. You're in either a famine mode, a fat-storing famine mode, or you're in a times of plenty mode. And if you do things right and go in the direction of leptin sensitivity, you're ideally, in order to succeed, you've got to be in a times of plenty mode. You're giving your brain the signals that you are not in a famine mode. And one of the most controversial things I have found over these decades of doing this and observation of what has the positive outcome in this direction, it is amazing that fasting, here's the big controversy, interrupts the times of plenty perception of the brain. And it just absolutely stops all of the health effects, which have been confirmed by Dr. Ron Rosedale with my program that he's seen again and again. It stops all of those benefits. So fasting stops it. And yet you are very well set up for fasting. Almost everybody is set up really well for periods of starvation, whether they're short, just not having breakfast or whatever. You're set up really well for that if you're what I call either close but no cigar as far as leptin sensitivity, or you're just eating typical keto where you're still spiking your blood sugar all the time. But it's better than eating, a lot of simple carbs, et cetera. Number one, you got to get rid of processed foods. And then if you're metabolically really in a bad place, then you're going to want to go further. So there are certain people that have to do this. There are certain people I call Tarzan types. And the Tarzan types, surprisingly, they do really have incredible muscle to fat ratio changes and all this stuff when they go all the way to leptin sensitivity, but they can live a very healthy life, fasting and doing all those things. But that same fasting, it's important for people to note, is not good if you're wanting to get pregnant, if you have thyroid issues, if you are at risk for an eating disorder or addiction. You will, in the rodent studies even, there's rebound eating after a skip meal. There's a situation where the next meal after a skip meal for a vulnerable person becomes drug-like and spikes dopamine. You start having that drug-like effect that I had. Most people that find themselves in a binge eating situation who've gone on diets, and it all started with the first diet, that dieting, that fasting, because first in my case, I went down to very low calories because I hit puberty and all of a sudden my hips, like the Incredible Hulk hips happened. And I said, I've got to go on a diet. I'm going to eat very little. And then you have that that moment where you just binge afterward, and then you're so kind of disgusted. A lot of people can relate to what I'm saying. You're so disgusted that you say, okay, I'm not going to eat, certainly not going to eat breakfast tomorrow. And I shouldn't even eat the next day because 3,500 calories, and this is not even proven, equal a pound of fat. So if I starve myself for 5 days and eat 200 calories a day, I'll have caught up with that binge after, it's ridiculous. And so you always wind up starving yourself. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I just ate more than I've ever eaten at one sitting. It's a nasty thing. And it has to be taken care of. And I thought I was a misfit. I thought I was emotionally, oh my gosh, it must be this horrible relationship I had with my mother. And I dealt with that. So I read good books on it. I did the emotional work, and it was still happening. What would have happened to a heroin addict? Could they read a bunch of good emotional books and get out of their heroin addiction? Not saying that everybody who is a garden variety carb addict or who has, took some antibiotics and all of a sudden they find, man, I really like sugar and the microbiome gets out of control. A lot of reasons why people have cravings. And there are slim Tarzan-like guys that sit and binge on chocolate bars. I mean, there's a lot of binging in the male world that we don't hear about, and they don't think there's anything wrong with it because it's just, there's a biochemistry to it. And when you start incapacitating yourself, you are dealing with some of the same biochemical functions and mechanisms of serious addiction. And there are brain scans showing alcoholics and binge eaters and heroin users with the same burnout dopamine receptors. And that gets healed with leptin sensitivity in a way that keto does not.
One of the things that may be explained by the understanding of leptin is AD36, adenovirus 36. There's an adenovirus 33, 35, et cetera. Researchers have been studying this virus for 30, 35 years, hundreds of papers, but you don't hear about it because it's the virus that supposedly makes you fat. But when we have the studies showing people around the world and they look at obese people and they see if they got antibodies to this particular virus, and it's a very easily spread respiratory virus. They found some cultures, the obese people had 80% of them had that expressed and appeared to be the main reason that they were having trouble with their metabolism. That's a big word. Their metabolism was off. Something was not right. And so it was a lot of things that went with that. They had certain food behaviors and habits that were not right. And then they found some cultures that was only 8 to 10%. But they said globally right now, 30% of the world's obese people are expressing antibodies to this virus. So, of course, there's a vaccine. And they've been practicing on the military. You should read the studies at the government level, studies on Air Force recruits. And those who came in heavy, they tested them, and those that they found the virus antibodies to, they tested the vaccine on them and found out that they lost weight like the rest of the recruits in boot camp. So when you start thinking about this, there's a reason I didn't tell you there was a virus 35 years ago, because social order would break down. You think COVID was bad with those masks and nobody want to be around you. Just wait till you see when you see an overweight person, get away from me. I don't want to catch your fatness, so to speak. But when you start thinking about these things that are inflammatory in our system, viruses of all sorts, fungi, bacteria, parasites, there's a long list. It's a hostile planet, folks, and thank God our immune systems are at least doing as good a job as they are. Whether or not this virus is man-made or not, I'm going to probably bet it's military, especially when they've got a vaccine that's just what you need on there. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, when you see what you're seeing in the studies, what's it like to have this virus, it sounds like they got incredible leptin resistance, that it's working up in that brain area. And a lot of viruses are attracted to the brain. They have an affinity for neurological tissue, and there's all kinds of ways that can get in your brain. There's a virus associated with Parkinsonism and Alzheimer's disease as well. Not the total cause, but associated with it. So when we start to see diet making changes, and all you're doing is shifting the fuel types and on the patterns of it. Also, let's talk about the preparation of the food. Like the other night, I had some wonderful lamb chops, organically grown, I can assure you, range-fed. But you think about, geez, did I cook these the right way? You know, you can grill them, you can bake them. But the biggest thing is lamb is loaded with fat, and it's easy to eat the fat mixed in with it. But let's say there's that thick inch of fat around there, would you tell your clients to eat that too with that meat or leave that part alone? Is all fat good? Because that's obviously a different type. There's a juicier fat in the meat, and then there's that outer fat. Maybe it's the difference between the brown fat and the white fat. So when you're eating animal products and for their fat, do we go after all the fat on there or selectively?
I think it was grass-fed, grass-finished. All of the fat is going to be good for you. And fat, as you know, is always, if it's not processed, if it's cold-pressed, if it's unadulterated, it's good fat, but they're not all comparable. And having been a vegan, not vegan, vegetarian, I have a lot of people that say they want to do my program, and can I do it in a vegan way? And I tell them, with compassion and love, I tell them that I am interested in people's optimal health. And there are so many. If they're not going to eat red meat, for example, the B vitamins, the choline, the carnitine, the carnosine, the quality zinc, you're not going to get enough from pumpkin seeds. You're not going to get the right form of your D and your K. And there are just so many things. And primitive man did not have a vitamin store. And we need these things more than ever because we have too many challenges going on. But as far as fat and so you need a variety of fat, but I wouldn't have someone just start eating fat if I didn't know that they weren't doing all of the other things right. And for example, you mentioned gallbladder health. And if someone goes on a fat-free diet, they're going to very potentially lose their gallbladder. The gallbladder wants practice digesting fat, and the big myth is that once the gallbladder comes out, that you can't digest fat. And it is a myth. It's incredible. And the first time I worked with a fellow with no gallbladder, I've worked with tons of people with no gallbladder. They do this beautifully. The first time I got Dr. Ron Rosedale on the phone, and I said, what's going to happen with a guy with no gallbladder? He goes, he'll do it beautifully. You just have to do it correctly because you can confuse the body. And so it's not something to dabble in. And there's 12 hours in my course. And in the course, I do not have advice for people that say, well, I'm still going to eat this blood sugar spiking thing. And blood sugar spiking things are not just processed foods. They're not just simple carbohydrates. They are, the who's who of superfoods are going to spike people's blood sugar, unfortunately. Now, would they again in the 50s or 60s? No. But right now, we're so kind of metabolically challenged and compromised that things that shouldn't spike our blood sugar do. And so leave those things for the Tarzan types and the people who are relatively healthy and don't have humongous food craving and ups and downs and metabolic challenges. But for someone like me or someone who's dealing with a health issue like a major autoimmune issue, you don't have to be heavy, but major autoimmune or seizures or inability to sleep or energy problems. And those people can do this all the way, but you have to do it all the way. Little things like alcohol, and I mean in a tincture, can throw you out, will throw you out. It's not just in some people, it's crazy. So what I've observed is a little bit of rice flour in a supplement, carrot powder, beet powder. It's small amounts that throw you out of this thing. That's something that is not said, is said for keto. So your keto pursuit, you're already not in leptin sensitivity, and that's for people who don't have the patience to really follow the rules, learn the rules, do it correctly, because leptin sensitivity is a deeper fat burning. And if you do things to throw a wrench in that wheel, you are going to be uncomfortable. And you are suddenly going to maybe put weight on, stress your gallbladder. You have to prepare. You have to change things gradually. If you haven't been eating fat, you got to do it gradually. And all or nothing people can hurt themselves even doing keto. I work with a neurologist who says, I love your approach because it's safe. It's really sensible in making sure people take all the steps. Because otherwise, he says, people, even his patients that start keto, can find themselves in the emergency room. So you have to allow your body to adjust gradually to the change in macronutrients.
Yeah, let's talk about the gallbladder and the liver itself. The gallbladder is part of the plumbing system of the liver, And it has a number of stimuli that cause it to flow regularly throughout the day. Our thoughts, the foods that we're passing by it, the chemistry of the upper stream digestion of the stomach acid, of course. Many doctors have told people to have their gallbladder out based on the amount of pain they're having, or maybe some blood work where liver enzymes are up. But a good surgeon, before they go cutting your gallbladder out, will basically do a functional test of that called the HIDA scan, HIDA. And so essentially, they're going to watch your liver fill up this particular dye contrast, dump it into the plumbing so they can see if the architecture of the plumbing is proper, if it's not leaking, if it's not kinked. They're going to measure how much the gallbladder absorbs out of that, and then they're going to inject into your arm a hormone in your body, synthetically made, called cholecystokinin. That's going to cause your gallbladder to contract downward, and it doesn't go squish like this. It's going to be a slower process over 20 or 30 minutes, and they're going to measure how much of that comes out, the ejection fraction, and that's going to take 20, 30 minutes. And you want to see 30, 35, even 50% of that come out. Now, if that comes out, and many times it does, then there's really no need, unless there's an infection, and that's rare, for somebody to be taking out your gallbladder. The bizarre design of the plumbing of this gallbladder is such that even though there's a lot of digestive secretions in there, there's also a lot of toxins that the liver has worked hard to get rid of and expects you to provide something to get rid of those toxins, and that could be the type of bacteria living in your intestines. They'll consume it. And it could also be the fiber present. And there are no fibers in the animal kingdom, so we'll have to have something from the vegetarian kingdom to help bind those up and carry those out of your system. Otherwise, it's possible that the sludge may start recirculating in there. And so, Kat, your diet is not all animal products. Matter of fact, I understand there's a nice balance between the animal fats and the vegetarian fats. And in your diet does have fiber in it, I understand, correct?
Oh,
I would
yeah.
assume so, yeah.
It's also part of a great buffer to the first thing you put in your mouth at a meal has a huge influence on how much insulin you're going to secrete. So if you put something that's hormonally neutral, like fat at the beginning of your meal, fiber at the beginning of your meal together, it does slow things down. And so that's great. And before I forget about it, I want to make sure to tell people again, the great fats, you need them. Even fatty liver makes me think when you're talking about the gallbladder, another really common problem is fatty liver. And people think, oh, don't eat fat if you have fatty liver. And that's a sugar thing. And as you know, that's going to accumulate. I had a fatty liver, non-alcoholic, fatty liver disease as well. And it is amazing how quickly that clears up. But again, you don't want to start eating all of these fats and be a sugar burner. Should you have a reasonable amount of fat, a decent amount, not be fat phobic, just go to where you're not fat phobic, you're not eating processed foods. But if you want to go all the way with this, then it is, I call it a compensatory thing. Would we have had to do what I have people do, which is you want it after you flip into it. You start making more lipase for 45 days at least after you start eating more fat. So you're never forcing fat. And it's yummy. And the culinary aspect is a big deal because I don't want to eat something swimming in fat. And as a child, I didn't like, taking it grossed me out when my dad would cut the fat off of the meat and have to be chewing away at it. I still don't like that. So I understand where people are coming from. I understand because of the woman that I was. And when I decided that I would, do something together in a setting where I helped people get through this transition, I thought about the woman I was, and I thought about what would gross her out. And I said, I'm going to convince that woman not to be afraid the first night. And the culinary aspect is just it's the thing that's the difference between people doing it and not. You gotta. I even customize what I do for people. In the last program that I just did, I took special requests, and someone had a nostalgic, not necessarily happy memory of shake and bake, and I grew up with shake and bake chicken, and I said, all right, we're going to do a facsimile of that, and the chicken was different just from how it was made, how much fat was in it. And we scratched that itch with a recipe and nostalgic things relating to food, the pleasure of food, all of it needs to be there. But that's a large reason that people wouldn't do this because the body loves it. and you smell things differently, you taste things differently. Right when you flip the corner, you can't believe that things you didn't like suddenly taste and smell really good. And so you have a major change. Your body is going through it much more, but you can't have it both ways. You can't then, on the weekends say, I'm going to carb cycle. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You will suffer. You will say, oh my gosh, all that energy I finally gained. And it takes, 4 days. I used to have 7-day programs. Now it's 5-day programs. Everyone is flipped into leptin sensitivity by day 4. It takes 72 hours for our liver to run out of glycogen and for the rubber to meet the road. And only then will the body truly use fat as its primary fuel and go into leptin sensitivity. It's only then. You have to have an interruption. Your brain will not work for a moment. It can be 2 hours, it can be 4 hours, and you will have no energy. I mean, a guy who owned a yoga studio had to pull over in his car and just lay down. He just really couldn't even drive. And I say, don't run heavy equipment. Don't try to do a podcast. Don't do anything that you have to really think well on. But you have to get across there. And then when you're across, it's like you wake up with a clear head. You have no brain fog. And all of a sudden, you have even energy. And you are 2 or 3 of yourself in general. The exceptions can be what prescription drugs. In fact, a long time ago, that popular HCG drug, right? That's the only time that I see people who need to lose weight. Occasionally some other drugs. God knows what the outcome will be from that Ozempic drug, right? Gastroparesis and thyroid cancers and all that other stuff. So prescription drugs can break some of the rules of what you can expect. But it is amazing how predictable and the timing of this. And everybody looks around at each other after about 4 days. And people are feeling their necks. They're off of their CPAP machines by the time they go home because there's so much swelling down. You see periods are coming back, 1 year, 5 year, 7 year, menopause, 1 7 year, 2 5 year, and many 1 year. And people say, I don't want to. Well, if it came prematurely, it was probably an adrenal thing or the thyroid thing, and those things are really amazingly addressed with it.
There's a lot of reasons the leptin sensitivity issue has crept upon us in the last half a century. You're citing a few examples already. We could have theories as to whether this is even intentional. There's a lot of things at play that have changed our food supply and how we eat it. But we also got other things that are affecting our body's dialogue, its signaling. We can't rule out the role of our microwave, our electronic smog, so to speak, of our cell phones. We have a plethora of toxins. When she mentioned the fatty liver, my theory is the majority of fatty livers, which I am understanding now is about 2 out of 3 Americans of all ages. That's pretty bad. But it seems to correlate with the rise of glyphosate, which is associated with a lot of the carbohydrate refined foods, and a very toxic poison, and one of the most prevalent toxins on the planet, and the liver is getting damaged by that as well. So fatty livers are not just always about storing excess fat. The fat is also replacing damaged and dead cells, temporarily holding their place for them. So we can look at all kind of theories that range from something bigger than this planet even, trying to change our destiny, the density of the population, et cetera. But it doesn't mean we can't fight back. It doesn't mean we can't be smart about this and understand what we can do individually to eat a clean diet. And unfortunately, because fat is where a lot of toxic things go, if we're going to eat a higher fat diet, we've got to be really, really cautious and smart about eating really good quality fats too. Now you say that the type of fats that are necessary dominantly have to come from the animal kingdom, you're finding, instead of the vegetarian sources?
I wouldn't say dominantly. You
But at
just have
least
to have,
half or so?
I mean,
Okay.
I don't even want to say half. I just want to say that you need a regular supply of butter fat and animal fat, so tallow and butter, even lard, although there's a little more omega-6 in lard. And I wanted to comment on the environmental piece and the practicality of this. Even right now with the avian flu looming, there is an incredible even an agenda we knew even before that to remove meat and associate meat with environmental risks, when in fact a blind eye is cast toward industrialized meats. And so regenerative farming, again, is one of the viable, they've measured it, and if there was any sizable conversion to regenerative farming where the old cycle of rotating your herds that literally bring back the soil diversity and the deep root systems and the water catchment in the soil. Alan Savory went to Africa, and the tribes pointed to the little tuft of grass growing over there, and that's where the animals grazed and pooped. And it's just a fact that those grazing animals are what can bring the land back. And it's being willfully ignored in an incredible way while we're being literally served up fake, beyond burger. I mean, worse than genetically modified. I mean, synthetic biology we're talking about.
Have you tried one of those Beyond Beef things?
Never will. And and they say, oh, it's plant-based. It's not even really plant-based. So they're using canola and synthetic and they want to replace the butter now. And then you're seeing 60,000 pounds of ground beef recalled for possible E. coli. And you're seeing just tens of thousands of chickens, killed and eggs and all of this recalled. There's something more going on here. And yet you really don't see any problems with them taking everything from the industrialized livestock raising issue. And so regenerative farming is honestly a reasonable, you can bring back better microclimates with regenerative farming. And so that's, if everyone who's at least listening to this chooses grass-fed, grass-finished, it's better for you, it's better for farmers, it's better for the environment, it's better all across the board. And it is not an environmentally irresponsible thing to do. And it's there. So the pressure just needs to go, not to meat, not to carbon. It needs to go to industrialized farms. And the people that would try to get us to eat food that they can patent and control and own, that is absolutely disastrous and has no business even them even trying to present it as a replacement for something that is the most incredible superfood known to man, red meat from grass-fed and grass-finished animals.
So we're talking about the sustainability of how this can work for the planet, getting away from the cities, getting small family farms again. People getting connected to the land. Unfortunately, people were drawn to the cities not for any other reason other than economics. And there's very few people, I know city dwellers in New York will tell you otherwise, that they just love the sound of the city, the hum of all the engines and the air conditioners and the sirens and you name it. But given the average human, they still prefer a little more space around themselves. So this is a diet, though, for each person that is sustainable. Now, I know I've never seen, especially with the thousands I've worked with our own diet programs, that the sustainability of it on an individual basis is always tough because there's only so many reasons people will give themselves to talk themselves into the discipline, the new way of life. No matter how good they're feeling, people will always find some excuse to drift, and then maybe they'll come back later, maybe they won't. And I know you've experienced this same balance that you have you have good compliance always in the beginning, and then long term you're going to see some people falling off the wagon.
If they did it for the wrong reason.
So yeah, you described the type of person who does best on your diet program that can do it as long as you have is what kind of person?
A person who has need for it, a clear need for it, coupled with a love for life. I mean, a life that they don't want it to end soon, anytime soon. They've got things they need to do, and they really are frustrated or upset at maybe a incurable kind of prognosis, something very upsetting, and they're just not ready to go. It's not the type of thing that if someone was, told by their mother they should do this or their spouse and dragged into it. It has to be something. It's a big change. It's a very big change. It's an adjustment. But this, I got to tell you, if you achieve leptin sensitivity, the people that do it say this is the only thing I can really stick with because of the willpower piece not being there anymore. There is no need for willpower anymore. You don't want what you're not having, and you don't even think about it. And in fact, when you encounter it, and you're out with friends, for example, especially young people, their friends might wave fries in their face and say, you know you want this. And they don't know how to explain to them that it means nothing to them. They feel nothing. And adults who have friends that they got to drink, they just got to drink every weekend. I always say, if one of your friends just brings it up like a second time, you're not drinking? They probably have a problem. But people with the right friends, it's just wonderful. They get support from them. No one cares. But like one woman said, who every summer gets together with her family and they have their dad's favorite, famous barbecue sauce that their dad made. And she goes and she doesn't have any migraines anymore. She's been doing this diet. And July comes and she goes, yeah, I went and I just felt horrible. She said, I just told my family, I suffer. If I have that, I'm not going to have it anymore.
Family stops inviting you because they think you're too fussy to eat. So ultimately, the late, great Dr. Atkins, when he started moving people towards the higher fat, higher profile of proteins especially, they found one thing at the very least, that the diet had the best compliance of anything so far. People felt satiety on this thing. So when we want to follow Kat's program, we can go and sign up in any number of ways. You can go into her website, or we can get the book. And can the people do it from the book alone, or we got to have them kind of working with you one way or the other right now?
The book is what I give people for a pre-program because it can't get you to leptin sensitivity. The way that people read books is somewhat potentially disastrous for that because they go to the 6-day jump start and they don't do the prep, et cetera. So, and also when I first put that book out, they wanted something that wasn't that hardcore. That was crazy talk back then. And so what I do in the book is I give people upgrades. Whatever they're doing, upgrade it to this. And then I undo systematically the brainwash that led to people eating how they eat now. But give them, again, a way to upgrade everything they're doing and really have a different attitude toward food. It's a big changer for a lot of people.
So are we going to be able to scale this up, though, to help large amounts of people by the hundreds of thousands? Is there a plan then to make this more scalable instead of the slower ways, or do you just want people to spread this word on their own and help teach others? What's the plan?
I want to tell people here, I don't think that in the hundreds, I don't think that the average person would have the patience to learn and take things as seriously. Maybe your viewers and viewers of other, great scientific kind of podcasts. But it is something that people can try. I'm not going on, Oprah, or I don't think she has her show anymore, but NPR, things like this, because I don't think I want it to be a trend. I don't want it to be a fad. I don't want it to be viewed and attacked for the many people who will dabble in it. I want people to take it seriously, and they found their way to you, and I want people who find their way to me, and those numbers are growing. But I like the trend right now because we have some work to do to undo just all of the myths about food and push back against really the taking away of something incredible. Because if they continue in this direction and are serious, with their Agenda 2030, removal of meat, I have more concerns about people who really, really need this, not being able to do this. Can you live a reasonably healthy life, even as some people as vegans, some people as vegetarians? You might lose some height. If you're a vegan, you're going to probably lose about 4 or 5 inches before you die. You're not having those fat-soluble nutrients. But we can be okay. I want us all to be able to be amazing. And right now, many, many, many people, your viewers, can. But again, We have to fight against literally this agenda to take away the most important nutrition for humans.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap that up today, and make sure you follow the links at the end of the broadcast here. There's a lot of good stuff that you'll learn delving into all of her other productions. There's other podcasts to look and learn from. And you can email her staff at info@informedbeauty.com and find a way into the program. And there's even some special discount for you if you mention that you saw this particular podcast. So we'll give you some motivation to want to learn more about this and sign up for the program. And so with that, good day, America.